The day my husband handed me divorce papers, I wasn't crying. I wasn't even shaking. I was standing in our kitchen making coffee, and I remember thinking how ordinary everything looked. The morning light coming through the window, the hum of the refrigerator, his briefcase sitting by the door like any other Tuesday. "I think we both knew this was coming," he said. I didn't answer. I poured my coffee and I looked at him, really looked at him, and I thought, you have no idea what you're about to hand me. My name is not important. What matters is that I was 31 years old, married for 6 years, working part-time as a dental office receptionist, and I was about to walk away from my marriage with almost nothing. And I was going to do it on purpose. Let me back up. My husband, I'll call him my husband because that's what he was for, 6 years, and that's what matters, was a project manager at a mid-sized construction firm in Columbus, Ohio. Good salary, company truck, the kind of man who coaches youth soccer on weekends so people think well of him. We met when I was 24 and he was 32, and I thought the age gap meant he was mature. I spent the next 6 years learning the difference between mature and practiced. His mother had lived with us for the last 2 years of our marriage. She had myelopathy and couldn't manage the 3-story walk-up she'd been renting in Cincinnati anymore. My husband's sister lived in Portland and made it very clear she wasn't in a position to help, so his mother came to us. I want to be honest. I was the one who suggested it. My husband had been dragging his feet for months, making excuses. The guest room was too small, the insurance wouldn't cover her prescriptions under our plan, the timing wasn't right. His mother was sleeping on an air mattress at her friend's house and managing her breathing treatments alone, and I was the one who finally said, "Enough, she's coming here." My mother-in-law and I had always gotten along. She was quiet, grateful in a way that never felt performed, and she had a sense of humor that caught you off guard. She used to leave little notes on the kitchen counter, not Post-its, actual small squares of paper she cut herself, with things like "the lilac bush out front is going to be spectacular this year," or "I heard you crying last night. I'm here if you want company." She noticed things. She paid attention. In a house where I had slowly become invisible, that mattered more than I knew how to say. The affair started, as far as I can tell, about 14 months before my husband served me those papers. I found out 8 months in. I won't go into everything: the phone, the messages, the receipts from a hotel 40 minutes outside Columbus that he'd been charging to a card I wasn't supposed to know about. What I will say is that when I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He looked almost relieved. "I was going to tell you," he said. "When?" He didn't answer that. The woman was someone he'd met through work. She was 39, recently divorced, and apparently they'd been talking about their future together. Their future, like ours, was already something he'd packed up and put in storage. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I know that's what people expect, the dramatic moment, the plates hitting the wall. What I actually did was go sit in my car in the driveway for about 40 minutes and listen to the radio. An old Fleetwood Mac song came on. I remember thinking that was almost too on the nose. Over the following months, we existed in the house like 2 people waiting for a bus that neither of us wanted to board. He slept in the guest room. I slept in our bed. My mother-in-law knew. She never said so directly, but one evening she knocked on my door and sat on the edge of my bed and held my hand for a long time without saying anything, and that was enough. When he finally brought the papers, I was ready. I had spent 3 months quietly doing what I needed to do. I had opened my own checking account. I had moved a small amount of money I had earned, money from birthday checks and side jobs, nothing that wasn't mine, into it. I had talked to a friend of mine who'd been through a divorce 2 years prior, and she'd given me the name of a family law attorney. But here is what I had also been doing. I had been watching, listening, paying attention the way my mother-in-law had always paid attention. And I had come to a decision that I knew would confuse everyone who heard it. His attorney was efficient and a little smug. The offer was laid out simply. He would keep the house, which had his name primarily on the mortgage. He would give me the car we shared, a 2019 Honda Civic with a cracked side mirror and about 80,000 miles on it. He would pay me a lump sum of $6,000. No spousal support, given that we both worked. And then his attorney said carefully that my mother-in-law's care arrangement would need to be discussed. My husband shifted in his seat. This was the part he was nervous about, because his mother-in-care arrangement had, in his mind, become his problem, financially, logistically, emotionally. The woman he was planning to build a new life with had made it clear she wasn't signing up to share a house with an older woman on oxygen some nights. He had been quietly trying to research memory care facilities, which was both inaccurate to his mother's actual condition and, I thought, deeply revealing about who he was. I looked at him across that conference table and I said very calmly, "I don't want the house. I don't want spousal support. I just want to take your mother with me." The room went quiet. His attorney wrote something on his notepad. My husband stared at me like I'd said something in a different language. You want to take care of her?" "I want her to live with me, yes." There was a long pause. He looked at his attorney. His attorney looked at him. I watched the calculation happen in real time. The relief, the logistical untangling, the faint guilt that he pushed down quickly. "I'll give you $8,000, he said, "on top of the car." I said that was fine. What he handed me in his mind was a consolation package, a damaged vehicle, a modest check, and a responsibility he'd never wanted. What I actually walked out of that building with was everything. My mother-in-law cried when I told her, not sad crying, the other kind. The kind that comes out of somewhere deep and doesn't have a clean name. "He didn't even call to tell me himself," she said after a while. "No," I said, "he didn't." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You didn't have to do this." "I know," I said. "I wanted to." We moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood about 12 minutes from where I'd been working. It was older, a little scuffed, with radiator heat that clanked in the winter. The ceilings were high, though, and there was a covered porch off the back that my mother-in-law immediately claimed as hers. She put a bird feeder out there within the first week. I kept my job at the dental office. I picked up a second part-time shift doing admin work for a small physical therapy practice 2 evenings a week. The $8,000 covered our deposits and the first few months of breathing room. I had a plan, and I was executing it one day at a time. My mother-in-law's health was more stable than my husband had seemed to believe, or maybe more than he'd wanted to believe. She used her nebulizer twice a day. She tired easily in heat, and she needed follow-up appointments with her pulmonologist every 3 months. But she was sharp, funny. She had opinions about everything from local politics to the correct way to make biscuits from scratch, and she shared them freely and without apology, and I loved her for it. About 6 weeks after we moved in, she asked if she could help with the rent. She had Social Security, not a lot but consistent, and a small pension from 31 years working as a school secretary in the Cincinnati public school system. She was not, as my husband seemed to have believed, a financial black hole. She was a woman who had been made to feel like a burden by her own son, and she had started to believe it. "You don't have to," I said. "I know I don't have to," she said, and that voice she had, "I want to." We worked out a simple, fair arrangement. It helped both of us. The first time I found out what was happening on my husband's end, it was through his sister, who I had always gotten along with well enough despite the distance. She called me on a Thursday evening unprompted. "I just wanted to check on Mom," she said, "and honestly, I heard some things." The woman he'd left me for had moved into our old house almost immediately. They'd been talking about getting married by spring. And then, apparently, things had started to fracture in ways he hadn't anticipated. A business deal had gone sideways. A contract dispute that had been building for a year and that my husband had been managing poorly, according to his sister, who'd heard this from their cousin who worked in the same industry. The firm had started an internal audit. His name was connected to some procurement decisions that didn't look good under scrutiny. I listened carefully and said very little. I didn't feel victorious. I want to be clear about that. I felt tired in the way that comes after a long time of being in pain, and then the pain slowly easing. It's not happiness, exactly. It's more like remembering what it felt like to breathe normally. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was his attorney. Not about me, about my mother-in-law. Apparently my husband had decided, or his partner had decided, where they decided together that he should have some form of ongoing financial responsibility for his mother's care now that she was living with me. His attorney was calling to discuss what that might look like. I called my own attorney, who I had kept on retainer for exactly this possibility. What followed was a brief, efficient process. My mother-in-law was not a child. She was a competent adult who had chosen freely where she wanted to live and with whom. She signed a simple affidavit confirming this. Her son had no legal claim to direct her living situation or use it as leverage in any ongoing proceeding. The matter was closed within 2 weeks. He didn't call her, not even then. She didn't say much about it. One morning, she left a note on the kitchen counter the way she always did. This one said, "Some people only reach out when they want something. That's the only thing I'm sad about." I kept that note. I still have it. In the spring, her pulmonologist cleared her for travel. Nothing international, nothing too strenuous, but domestic trips were fine. Her sister lived in Asheville, North Carolina, and the two of them hadn't seen each other in almost 3 years. I drove her to the airport myself. She cried again at the gate, which made me cry, which made a passing gate agent ask if we were okay. "We're wonderful," my mother-in-law said, pulling herself together with that particular dignity she had. "I'm going to see my sister." She came back 10 days later with 2 jars of local honey and a framed photograph of the two of them standing in front of a dogwood tree in bloom. She put the photograph on the mantel in the living room. She still talks about that trip. The thing I want to say, the thing that's hard to explain in a way that doesn't sound like a Hallmark movie, and I mean it genuinely, is that what I walked away from my marriage with was not what anyone in that conference room thought I was taking. He thought he was giving me a consolation prize, a problem. A woman with a chronic illness who needed rides to doctor's appointments and had strong opinions about biscuits. He thought he was getting away light, and he was making sure to be generous about it so that he could feel good about himself. But my mother-in-law knew exactly what her son was. She had known for a long time, and she had been waiting, not planning, not scheming, just quietly waiting for the chance to live in a house where she was actually wanted. She brought more into our life than I can properly explain. Not financially, though, that helped. Just presence. The kind of steadiness that comes from someone who has lived long enough to know which things actually matter and which things are noise. When I was overwhelmed at work, she made dinner. When I couldn't sleep, I'd find her on the porch at 2 in the morning with a cup of decaf, and she'd just move over to make room. I got a promotion at the dental office manager. The pay difference was meaningful, and the benefits included better health coverage, which meant I could add my mother-in-law to my plan. My husband, I heard eventually through his sister, had left the construction firm. Whether by choice or otherwise, I was never fully clear. He and his partner had separated before they got to the wedding they'd been planning. The house, our old house, went on the market in the fall. I didn't feel glad. I want to say that clearly because it would be easy to frame it as a revenge story. And I don't think it was. I hadn't planned any of that. I had just made one decision, clearly, with both eyes open, and let the rest unfold the way things do when you stop trying to hold them together out of fear. Last month, my mother-in-law turned 72. Her sister came up from Asheville, and a few friends she'd stayed in touch with from Cincinnati made the drive. I made the cake because she told me specifically she wanted the lemon one I'd made for her birthday 2 years ago in the old house, the one my husband hadn't come home in time for, and which the two of us had eaten at the kitchen table together. Just the two of us, while she told me about the year she'd almost moved to San Francisco at 26 and didn't, and whether that had been the right choice. We sang to her on the porch with the bird feeders swinging in the April wind, and she laughed at something her sister said, and I looked at her and thought, I made the right call. Not the rational call, not the financially strategic call, though it worked out. The right one. The one that, when I was sitting in that conference room, looking at a list of assets to be divided, I felt somewhere past logic, in whatever place in you that knows things before you can explain them. The Honda Civic finally gave out in January. I bought a used Subaru with a sunroof, and my mother-in-law calls it the Chariot. She asks to go to the farmer's market every Saturday morning. We take the long way home so she can see the reservoir. I don't think much about my husband anymore. Sometimes I hope he's okay, in the vague way you hope for people who've become strangers. Sometimes I don't think about him at all. Mostly I think about what's for dinner, and whether the lilac bush we planted in the back corner last fall is actually going to come up this year the way the man at the nursery promised it would. My mother-in-law says it will. She says you have to give things time, and the right conditions, and trust that the roots are doing something underground, even when you can't see it. I'm starting to believe her. I've thought a lot about that conference room. The fluorescent light, the smug attorney, my husband's face when I said the words out loud, "I just want to take your mother with me." He thought he was the smart one in that room. And maybe, on paper, he was. He kept the house, he kept his plans, he walked out with everything that looked like winning. But here's what I've come to understand. The choices we make when we think no one is watching, or when we think we're getting away with something, those are the choices that build the life we end up living. My husband made his quietly, over years. Small ones at first. A little dishonesty here, a little cruelty there. Treating his own mother like a liability on a balance sheet. None of those things looked catastrophic in the moment. But they accumulated, they always do. I'm not a person who believes in tidy cosmic justice. I don't think the universe keeps score. But I do believe that character is a direction, not a single decision, and that over time, the direction you've been moving becomes the place you arrive. My husband had been moving towards something for a long time. He arrived there. That's not punishment. That's just how things unfold when you live without integrity. What I did in that conference room wasn't strategic exactly. It looked irrational from the outside. I know that. My own mother thought I'd lost my mind, but I had been paying attention for 6 years, and I had learned something important. The thing everyone dismisses is almost always the thing that matters most. My mother-in-law had been treated like a burden for so long that she had begun to carry herself like one, quietly, apologetically, shrinking. She was one of the most perceptive, resilient, genuinely decent people I had ever known, and her own son couldn't see it. I could, and I chose to act on what I saw. That's the part I want to sit with, because I think it's the part that actually changed my life, not the karma angle, not the fact that things worked out. The decision itself, made clearly, made honestly, made without guarantee of any particular outcome. That took something I had to build slowly over those hard years. The ability to think past fear and short-term logic, to trust my own judgment even when it looked foolish, to do the right thing not because it was safe, but because it was right. My mother-in-law turns out to be the kind of person who makes you want to be better, not by lecturing, just by example. The way she notices things, the way she keeps showing up, the way she never let bitterness become her personality, despite having real reasons to be bitter. Living alongside that kind of quiet strength does something to you. It asks you to rise to meet it. I'm not the same person I was in that kitchen watching my husband pack his things. I'm less afraid, more deliberate. I ask myself more often, is this who I want to be? And I try to answer honestly. The lilac bush came up this spring. She was right about the roots.